Before this volcano last erupted, it was producing 2,200 earthquakes a day. This spring, it produced fewer than 100. That should be reassuring, except for one problem. The magma reservoir underneath it is now fuller than it was on the day it erupted in 2015. It is loaded. It is inside a publicly declared eruption window that closes on the 31st of December, and it is getting quieter every month. By the end of this, you will know exactly which number tells you it has started. 300 miles west of the Oregon coastline, under nearly a mile of Pacific water, sits the most active volcano in the United States. Most people have never heard its name. It has never killed anyone, never closed an airport, never forced an evacuation, and by every assessment the United States Geological Survey has published, it never will. It is called Axial Seamount, and right now it is the most closely watched piece of ground on the planet. The reason has nothing to do with danger. It has to do with a promise that a small group of scientists made in public, in writing, with a date attached. Axial Seamount is the only volcano on Earth carrying a standing, public, dated eruption forecast. Not a hazard level, not an alert color, an actual deadline, printed and presented at scientific conferences, saying this volcano will erupt before a specific day on the calendar. That day is December 31st, 2026. As of this week, a little over 4 months remain on it, and the volcano is not cooperating. By the central measurement the forecast depends on, Axial is already loaded. Its magma reservoir has refilled past the level that set off its last eruption. It is sitting above its own trigger line, but the rate at which it is filling has collapsed, and its earthquake count, the signal that is supposed to climb as rock begins to break, has been falling for most of a year. The researchers who wrote the forecast published their most recent assessment on the 23rd of July, and the phrase they used was that an eruption is not imminent. That is the situation. A volcano past the point where it should have gone off, inside a deadline that is burning down, getting quieter every month, and the scientists watching it have said plainly that they do not know why. Nobody forecasts volcanoes this way. That is the first thing to understand about why this matters. Volcano monitoring, almost everywhere in the world, is a short-range business. Instruments pick up swelling ground, gas emissions, or a swarm of small earthquakes, and an observatory raises an alert level. The warning window is days, sometimes hours. Nobody stands up at a conference 2 years out and names a date, because the reputational cost of being wrong is enormous. Axial is the exception, and the reason is that Axial is harmless. It sits on the Juan de Fuca Ridge, a mid-ocean spreading center where two tectonic plates are pulling apart, about 480 kilometers offshore. Its summit is roughly 1,400 meters below the surface, about 4,600 feet down. Its caldera measures about 100 meters from rim to floor, and its rift zones run something like 50 kilometers north and south. When it erupts, it produces gentle, slow-moving lava flows on the seafloor under a mile of water. It has done this 3 times in the instrumental record, in January of 1998, in April of 2011, and in April of 2015. Because nobody is downstream of it, the researchers can do something they could never do at a volcano above a city. They can make a falsifiable prediction, publish it, and let the world watch them be right or wrong. In their own framing, Axial is the perfect natural laboratory. Very active, densely instrumented, and hazardous to no one. It is the one volcano on Earth where a blown forecast costs nothing but pride. The people making that bet are Bill Chadwick, a research associate at Oregon State University's Hatfield Marine Science Center, and Scott Nooner, a professor at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. They have been studying this seamount for decades, and they have already been publicly wrong once. The model they built is almost embarrassingly simple, which is exactly why it is interesting. Axial behaves like a slow balloon. Between eruptions, magma rises from the hot spot below and refills a shallow reservoir under the caldera. As it fills, the caldera floor lifts. That lift is measured directly by bottom pressure recorders sitting on the seafloor, instruments sensitive enough to detect the ground rising by fractions of a centimeter under 1,400 meters of water. When an eruption happens, magma drains out into the rift zones, and the caldera floor drops, sometimes by meters, in a matter of hours. The observation that turned this into a forecast is that the balloon appears to pop at roughly the same tightness every time. Each eruption seems to trigger at or near the inflation level reached before the previous eruption. The 2015 eruption went off at a threshold about 30 centimeters higher than the 2011 threshold. So the working expectation since then has been that the next eruption should trigger somewhere between the 2015 level and about 30 centimeters above it. That is the whole model. Watch the floor rise, know where the ceiling is, extrapolate. And in 2014, it worked. Chadwick and Nooner publicly forecast that Axial would erupt in 2015, and it did, 7 months later. That forecast succeeded because the volcano was refilling fast and steadily at the time, roughly 70 centimeters per year, which made drawing the line forward straightforward. You had a slope, you had a target, you had a date. Everything that has gone wrong since then comes down to the slope refusing to hold still. In July of 2024, with the caldera floor closing in on the 2015 threshold, the team issued the forecast that made headlines. Axial Seamount would erupt before the end of 2025. They presented it publicly at the American Geophysical Union meeting that December. The year passed. Media coverage came in 3 separate waves, each recycling some version of a headline saying the volcano could erupt any day, and Chadwick's own blog documented every one of them with visible irritation, noting that nothing had actually changed in the data. The volcano did not erupt. On the 31st of December, 2025, 2 weeks after Chadwick presented an update at that year's AGU meeting, the forecast was formally revised. The new window before the end of 2026, and the team was blunt about why the first attempt failed. Pattern recognition forecasting, they wrote, has proven to be unreliable simply because the pattern can change. That sentence deserves a second read, because it is the most honest thing in this entire story. The one law the forecast rested on was that the volcano repeats itself. Half of that law has held up. The trigger threshold looks real. The other half, the steady refill, has failed over and over since 2015. The volcano keeps filling in fits and surges, speeding up, slowing down, stalling, and no version of a straight line drawn through that behavior has produced a date that stuck. So the team did not just move the goalposts, they changed the measurement. Here is where the story stops being a scheduling problem and starts being a genuine scientific puzzle. As of the most recent public update, Axial Seamount is fully reinflated. Its reservoir has recovered beyond the level that triggered the 2015 eruption. As of late October of 2025, the caldera floor stood about 10 centimeters above the 2015 trigger threshold, with perhaps 20 centimeters of headroom left before it reaches the top of the expected trigger band. By the logic of the balloon model, the volcano is inside the danger zone right now, not approaching it, in it, but the 2 things that should be accelerating are doing the opposite. Start with the inflation rate. Before the 2015 eruption, the caldera floor was rising at roughly 70 centimeters per year. By July of 2024, when the first forecast was issued, that had fallen to about 25 centimeters per year at the caldera center. Through late 2025, it was around 16, and through this year, the decay has continued and steepened. Measured against the eastern caldera rim, the 6-month average rate went from 10.6 centimeters per year to 8.9 to 6.5 as of the 23rd of July. The 3-month average tells an even starker story. 5.7 centimeters per year by mid-March, a brief rebound to 8.3 in the spring, then down to 4.5. The rate of reinflation has roughly halved twice inside a single year. Now the earthquakes. Before the 2015 eruption, Axial was producing about 2,200 earthquakes per day, sustained for an extended period. As of December of 2025, that had dropped to around 300 per day. From March through July of this year, the count has been under 100 per day on most days, with occasional bursts into the low hundreds. There have been isolated spikes, one day above 2,000 in late July of 2025, a few days above 1,000 that October, but nothing has held. The research team put it in writing back in March. In their previous post, they wrote they had been anticipating seeing an increase in seismicity before the next eruption. Instead, the opposite is happening, and when Chadwick addressed it on the 17th of March, his answer was 4 words long. What is causing this? We don't know. He added the only thing that can be said with confidence. It must reflect how the supply of magma to the volcano is changing with time. The revised forecast does not track how full the volcano is anymore. It tracks how broken the rock is. The new metric is the number of earthquakes per centimeter of uplift, and the reasoning behind it is worth walking through because it reframes the entire question. If the caldera floor rises and the rock around it simply flexes, you get very few earthquakes for a lot of movement. That is elastic deformation, and it can go on indefinitely. But if the rock has been pushed past the point where it can flex, it starts to fail, and you get a lot of earthquakes for very little movement. That is inelastic deformation, and it does not go on indefinitely. It ends in a rupture. In the 3 months before the 2015 eruption, that normalized number rose to and held near 10,000 earthquakes per centimeter of uplift. The researchers suspect that value marks the onset of exactly that transition, when the moment the rock stopped bending and started breaking. Since 2015, the normalized rate has climbed gradually with isolated high days, but it has never been sustained anywhere near that level. And here is the part that turns an abstraction into something you can actually watch. At the current uplift rates, hitting the failure threshold would require seismicity somewhere near 500 earthquakes per day. The earthquake catalog for Axial is maintained in near real time by William Wilcock and Mao-Chuan Zhang at the University of Washington, and it is public. Anyone can look at it. So the countdown metric is now a number on a public webpage under 100, and nothing is happening. Climbing toward 500 and holding, and the volcano is in the process of failing. Based on the exponential relationship between cumulative uplift and total earthquake count, the team expects that threshold to be crossed before the end of 2026. That expectation, and nothing more than that, is the standing forecast. There is a second forecast running on this volcano right now, and no one is permitted to see it. Beginning the week of the 12th of November, 2025, a fully independent physics-based forecasting experiment started running on the live data coming off the seafloor. The model is a mechanical failure model developed by Qinghua Lei at Uppsala University in Sweden and Didier Sornet at 8th Zurich in Switzerland. It does not look for patterns from previous eruptions. It looks at the physics of material approaching failure, an approach that has previously been shown to predict failure time in retrospect for landslides, rock bursts, glaciers, and other volcanoes, including past axial data. That team is generating dated forecasts of when Axial will erupt, at least once a month. They are not publishing any of them until after the eruption occurs. The reason is scientific hygiene rather than secrecy. If you publish a date, miss, quietly revise, publish again, and eventually land close, you have not tested anything. By sealing every forecast and committing publicly to release all of them afterward, hit or miss, the experiment produces something rare, an honest score, every prediction in order, with no opportunity to have adjusted after the fact. So at this moment there exists a dated prediction for when this volcano will erupt, generated by an independent physics model sitting sealed, and nobody outside that experiment knows what it says. That is the state of the primary story. Now consider what these instruments actually recorded the last time this volcano went off, because that event is the yardstick every number you have just heard is measured against. On the 23rd and 24th of April, 2015, Axial Seamount erupted with the entire observatory watching. In roughly 24 hours, the cabled instruments recorded approximately 8,000 earthquakes. The caldera floor dropped 2.4 meters as magma drained out of the reservoir and into the North Rift zone. Lava erupted along about 7 kilometers of that northern rift. One flow lobe was so thick that when the remotely operated vehicle Ropos went down to survey it afterward, the vehicle had to ascend 90 meters, 295 feet, just to get up the face of it. It was the first submarine eruption ever recorded live by an in-place cabled observatory, not reconstructed afterward from a research cruise, not inferred from a distant hydrophone, but recorded as it happened by instruments already sitting on the volcano. What the follow-up dives found is the part that stays with people. Along the fresh fissures, researchers encountered what they call snowblower vents, openings issuing a blizzard of white flocculent material into the water column. That material is biological. Microbial communities living in the rock had been given an enormous pulse of chemical energy by the fresh lava, and they bloomed so violently that the seafloor was, in effect, exhaling life. Within weeks of an eruption, the volcano was producing more living material than it could hold. Now put that scene next to today's numbers. 8,000 earthquakes in a day, against fewer than 100 a day this spring. 2,200 a day sustained beforehand, against a volcano that cannot manage a sustained few hundred. A caldera floor rising at 70 centimeters a year against 4.5. The 2015 eruption is not just a good story. It is the calibration point for every threshold, rate, and marker in the current forecast. And measured against it, Axial today does not look like a volcano 7 months from erupting. It looks like a volcano that has gone to sleep on top of a full tank. That is the puzzle. But there is a second problem, and it has nothing to do with the volcano. Everything you have just heard depends on a single piece of infrastructure that came very close to being switched off this summer. Axial Seamount is monitored by the Ocean Observatories Initiative's Regional Cabled Array, operated by the University of Washington. It is a facility of roughly $386 million, running something like 660 miles of undersea fiber optic cable that carries power and bandwidth to more than 140 instruments on the seafloor and through the water column. At Axial, that means bottom pressure. Recorders, tilt meters, seismometers, and hydrophones, all streaming to shore continuously. This is not the best way to watch this volcano. It is the only way. Axial's earthquakes are almost all magnitude 2 or smaller. They are far too small and far too distant to register on any land-based seismic network on the west coast. If that cable goes dark, the volcano does not become harder to observe. It becomes invisible. On the 21st of May this year, the National Science Foundation announced a major descoping of the Ocean Observatories Initiative. The New York Times reported the dismantling plan on the 1st of June. The instruments that make the only public volcano forecast on Earth possible were scheduled to be shut down in the middle of the forecast window. What followed was a political fight rather than a scientific one. Bipartisan pushback in Congress, led by Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, forced a reversal, and on the 18th of June, the administration backed off. But the reprieve is partial and it is dated. Under the current plan, all of the Ocean Observatory's initiative's monitoring arrays are still to be discontinued, except the regional cabled array, and the array itself is funded to operate only until September of 2028. What happens after that is unclear. And on the 22nd of June, Science reported that core National Science Foundation research programs, including the program that funds the axial forecasting work itself, are still being cut. So there are now 2 countdowns running on this volcano, and they are racing each other. The first is the volcano against its own threshold. It is loaded, it is inside the trigger band, and it has until the 31st of December to make good on a forecast that has already been revised once. The second is the observatory against its budget. Funding runs to September of 2028, and given how quiet Axial has become, that horizon is no longer obviously further away than the eruption. The eruption intervals do not settle the question either. 1998 to 2011 was 13 years. 2011 to 2015 was 4. 2015 to now is 11 years and 4 months, and counting. A volcano with a 4-year gap and a 13-year gap in the same short record is not a volcano with a schedule. There is one more wrinkle worth flagging. All 3 recorded eruptions happened between January and April. Published work on Axial has documented that its earthquakes cluster at low ocean tide, when the weight of water pressing down on the caldera is at its least, which is a real mechanism for tidal modulation of a volcano this shallow-chambered. Whether the January to April pattern is that physics showing through, or coincidence with a sample size of 3, is unresolved. But the next such window, January through April of 2027, falls just outside the current deadline. And before the comments fill with it, one claim needs answering directly. Every time Axial makes headlines, a theory circulates that an eruption there will set off the Cascadia megathrust, or send a tsunami into the west coast. It will not. Axial sits 300 miles offshore on a spreading center, a completely different tectonic system from the subduction zone that runs along the coast. Its eruptions are slow, effusive lava flows under nearly a mile of water. The 2015 eruption produced 8,000 earthquakes, all of them around magnitude 2, and no wave of any kind. The energies involved are orders of magnitude too small, and the distance far too great to load the megathrust. The Geological Survey and the research team both state plainly that Axial poses no threat to people or to ocean travel. There are 3 specific things to watch over the next 4 months, and all 3 are public. The first is the daily earthquake count on the University of Washington's Axial catalog. Under 100 per day means nothing is developing. A sustained climb toward 500 per day is the condition the current forecast is built on, and it would be the first genuine signal that the rock has started failing rather than flexing. The second is the next update to the forecast blog out of Oregon State. The number to look for is the 3-month uplift rate, which stood at 4.5 centimeters per year in July. If it keeps falling, the December deadline is almost certainly going to be missed a second time. If it rebounds toward 10 or above, the countdown restarts in earnest. The third is what happens to the regional cabled arrays funding after September of 2028, because that is now a live variable in whether this experiment ever gets an answer at all. What is actually being tested here is bigger than one seamount. The ambition is to move eruption forecasting away from pattern matching and toward physics, the same transition weather forecasting made in the 20th century, and then to carry whatever works to the volcanoes that sit above cities. At Axial, 7 months of warning is a conference talk. At a populated volcano, 7 months of warning is measured in lives. That is why a group of scientists is willing to publish a date and risk being wrong in front of everyone, twice. Right now, the honest answer is that nobody knows. The best monitored volcano on Earth is sitting above the pressure that set off its last eruption, watched by 140 instruments and one sealed prediction, and it is getting quieter by the month. Either it is about to demonstrate that eruptions can be scheduled, or it is about to demonstrate that even with every instrument we own pressed against its skin, we still cannot read a volcano. We will know which by the end of December. We will be watching the earthquake count.